Alright, it looks like we're live now, at least on YouTube, but I'm not sure about Twitch yet. So I'm just going to give it a few more seconds here, maybe 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, there we go. We're good. I'm going to go in and start the video. What is up on the U-Box, guys? This is TopHat Productions 115 coming at you with yet another video, and this one might just lighten your day. This one might give you a few laughs, and this one might also preemptively, how should I say this? This might prevent a mistake that you might encounter or might... Long story short, I'm going to explain a little boo-boo, a mess-up that I did recently that started back months ago due to misplanning, so that you won't encounter this same mistake, especially if you're using the same server as me or one with similar specifications. So let us begin. A few months ago, I bought these two items. I bought this StarTech.com right here. As it says, it is a SATA power splitter 1.4. And I bought this cable right here. Now, if you look carefully at the description here, and by the way, I've included links to all the relevant sources I include here in the description for you guys in advance. If you look very carefully here, what do you see? Right. It is meant to be compatible with, it's meant to be compatible with the HP ProLiant DL380, right? Not the 580, the 380. So before we go even any further, this right here should be sending off like alarm signals telling you, hey, this is where the mistake happened. I just gave away the entire story there just now if you're paying attention. But we're going to go back to that in just a bit. I ordered this bad boy back in April 5th of this year, months ago. I ordered this bad boy August 8th, 2020. Right. So I ordered these months ago. This was ordered first because I knew I'd need that. This was ordered second because I thought that I'd need it. I ordered these two to try and power up the, let me see here, do I have the name for it? The Kingwin, the drive array that I mentioned. I'll even mention the model here so I can actually, yeah. I purchased those two items in an attempt to power the Kingwin MKS435TL. Now that right there is a drive enclosure with 4 3.5-inch drive bays. And I think I've actually taken pictures of it and shown it off online before. But long story short, it is a it's a 4-bay drive enclosure that's meant to go into a 5-point-something-inch drive bay, right? So it's an enclosure that's meant to go into a bigger 5-inch drive bay on the front of your PC last I checked. But I'm using it for a slightly different purpose. Instead of putting it inside of another PC, I'm going to have it sitting outside the server so it can kind of act as an external drive cage for me, seeing that the server that I purchased has no 3.5-inch drive bays in it. It only has 2.5-inch drive bays, and the drives that I originally had planned to put into that bay were going to be ones that were coming out of the workstation, which are also 3.5-inch drive bays. But I decided to actually upgrade from the 2 terabyte drives to the 4 terabyte IBM drives I picked up recently. The drives I have in the workstation are SATA drives. They are 2 terabyte SATA hard drives. And the ones I purchased recently to replace them are 4 terabyte IBM SAS hard drives. But the important part here is that they are 3.5-inch hard drives and therefore will not fit into the 2.5-inch drive bays in the DL580. Due to the fact that they won't fit inside the 580, at least not natively, I had to find a way to actually connect them externally. And I decided, of all things, to try using what was pretty much meant to be an internal drive cage, right? Took the Kingwin drive cage that I mentioned and tried using that outside of the server, which made like a whole bunch of issues for me as you're seeing here. But long story short, bought all the parts, they all arrived. And when I first plugged in the drive bay, let me check here, yeah. When I first plugged in the drive bay into the server, it wouldn't power on, right? So the fan itself at the back of the enclosure, at the back of the Kingwin drive enclosure, actually did spin up. The fan at the back spun up, but the drives didn't spin up, and on top of that, the lights, the indicator LEDs, didn't turn on either, for the most part. So that left me with the conundrum of wondering whether or not it was actually spinning up. Of course, when I had powered on the server for the first time, went into ESXi and tried to detect the drives, lo and behold, I didn't see the drives. And I was thinking maybe that I had to actually configure the HBA, or maybe there was a BIOS configuration option that I needed to change. Well, just so happens that both of those were wrong. And what happened was today I decided to do a little bit more testing. Today I decided to actually take the T7500, the workstation that I'm using to live stream to you right now. I took the side panel off of it and did this ugly little operation here where I plugged the drive enclosure into the SATA power for the T7500, and then from there put the HBA inside of the T7500 as well. Took the HBA, taking the HBA and putting it into the T7500 pretty much acted as a quick test to see if it was the HBA that was the issue. Because if the HBA was the issue, then not only would it not power on in the server, it most likely also wouldn't power on in the workstation. So that was like pretty much the premier test here. Taking that HBA and putting it into another computer, which actually indicated that the HBA card did work, and it wasn't a firmware option either, because if it was a firmware option, as in like firmware configuration on the HBA, it probably wouldn't have powered on the T7500 either. Due to the fact that I got it working on the workstation, I knew that it was something wrong with the way that I had it hooked up or set up on the server, which then led me to actually try testing it in the server again one more time just to confirm, and sure enough, it didn't power on. Afterward, when I saw that it didn't power on yet again, I decided to look back at the description for the commie cable, because the description for that cable had actually changed on Amazon a few times. Not in any major ways, but in ways that would possibly provide more insight. So I went back to the description for the commie cable, because at the time there weren't as many details on this, and I decided to actually check it out. Looked and saw that it, as you see here, 380 G7. That was the only officially compatible server model listed for this part. And that's when I became a little bit suspicious of the cable, wondering if I had bought the wrong cable. So that led me to actually disconnect this commie cable, because maybe I bought the wrong one. And instead what I decided to do was I decided to actually look around on the internal the internal logic boards in the server to see if there are any spare SATA connectors. Now, here's the original picture that I pulled up. And as you guys already know, if you actually pay attention, my server isn't oriented like this, it is oriented like this. It is turned towards the wall in my room, so I had to sit there, find a decent picture so I could actually see what I was doing, and I found out about this connector right here. This connector right here is actually unused on my server, while this one right here is being used for the optical drive, if I remember correctly. Yeah, this one's being used for the optical drive. This one is completely unused. So when I found out that I had a spare SATA data and SATA power connector, I decided, hey, seeing that the commie cable might not be working, why don't I try using the internal SATA power connector instead to see if that would work? Well, in order to test out the internal SATA power connector, I needed a SATA power connector that would actually fit on this. So I had to dig through my inventory, my parts box, to see if I had just a spare SATA power connector sitting around. And lo and behold, I had one with this exact connector. However, as you can see, it has like two little outcroppings, I guess prongs or something like that. It has two of these plastic outcroppings on the side. One of them had to go, and it was the one on this side, so they would actually fit into this little connector, so they would go into this socket here. So I had to cut this part off here, this little part that kind of pokes up. And once I got it connected to this port right here on the motherboard, I was then able to actually take the cable here. The other end is, I think, a SATA female, I think? Yeah. I took the SATA female end, plugged it into the male end on this cable here that I already had one of, and then from there took the other end of this cable and plugged it into the drive enclosure. Because the drive enclosure has two SATA power connectors, so I just took the two on the end and connected to the back of that drive enclosure, the king one. Lo and behold, it powered on, right? So Here's a picture of what it looked like when I was done hooking up to the server. Because the cable is a little bit too small to actually be routed outside and over the panel, I had to actually leave the server open so I could actually test it out. This is what it looked like, the cabling that I did to actually test it. And here's what it looked like when it powered on. The lights on the drive enclosure actually turned on, and as a result, I knew for sure that I had gotten the wrong cable. The COM cable was not meant for that purpose. So, as a result of all this testing, one, I got the HBA drive enclosure working, which is a huge success, and I'll explain why that's important in a few seconds. Secondly, I also know that now I need another cable because the cable that I currently have is not long enough to actually extend from here all the way out the back of the server over the server. Is it the access panel? Yeah, it's called the access panel. Over the back of the server access panel and to the back of the drive enclosure, because the drive enclosure will be sitting on top of the access panel. Because the access panel would be closed and it would act as a surface for this drive enclosure to sit on. In order for me to actually have the drive enclosure powered while sitting on top of the back access panel, I would actually need to order another one of these, that of which I did order today. So that's going to show up in like about a week, and then from there I'll be able to actually play with the 16 terabyte hard drive array once that's connected up. But long story short is, do the research before you buy the cables. In my case, it wasn't too easy because the cable that I was looking at originally, the COM actually didn't have like as many details in its listing until like, I think months after the purchase that I made. So I ended up buying it and then later finding out that it just wasn't going to work for my purposes. And the whole time I was investigating other possible causes to see if I had done something else wrong, or to see if the LSI HBA needed to be firmware updated, or if I needed to swap out the firmware for some other firmware version. But no, it was the COM cable, and I found out about it just in time to actually get the 16 terabyte storage array working. With that said, I'll go on and now explain why that's important. As I've said in previous live streams, there are certain services and applications that can actually eat up a ton of storage space if they run for long term. For example, if you have a Minecraft server with a decent amount of users on it, the world file is going to get big, the log file is going to get big, and a few others might get a little bit large in size as well. Nextcloud, if you're using something for just straight up storage, you want as much storage as you possibly can, especially if you're dealing with large files. And there was one other that I was going to mention. Yes, YASI. If you have something that does web crawling or something like that, and you have to keep like a local search index somewhere, that can get pretty large too if you start crawling either lots of websites or multiple large websites that have like a lot of pages and stuff like that. So for indexing and web crawling, you definitely need storage space. And for the other applications that I've yet to mention, there are others that will possibly need that storage space as well. So now that you know, this is a mistake that you can avoid. If you're getting a DL580 or another server like the one that I have, where you aren't sure if you have PSU cables that are available to power a certain device, you should probably look into the other ports that are on not only your motherboard or internal logic boards in general, but also the other PSU connectors that might be available for your specific server model. Be sure to do the research first, and don't go around trying to swap in parts for other servers, because it most likely isn't compatible. That said, I learned my lesson. It took me a while, and as a result, the project got delayed a little bit because I couldn't really move forward with some of the other objectives until I got this drive array working. So now you know why things have been a little bit slow around here, at least in part. Don't make the same mistake that I did, buy the right parts. And if you're using a DL580 G7, be sure to look at the motherboard, because the motherboard actually has other connectors on there, like these spare SATA power and data connectors, which can be used. If you aren't planning on using the optical drive, which I believe in most cases by default is a read-only, so it can't even actually burn disks. So if you aren't going to be using the optical drive, you can actually get rid of the optical drive and use the connector that it was sitting on. Or, better yet, this connector here, which is actually free in some cases if it's not configured to be used by another device or another component. And if you don't need this one, and you have this one free, then hey, you have a pair of SATA data and SATA power connectors available for you to use for other purposes. Which is great, because if these weren't available to me, I would not have been able to actually power the external drive enclosure. So now that you know that, I'm going to go in and end the live stream right here. Hopefully I didn't go over like 10 minutes, did I? Crap, I've been talking for 16 minutes. But now you guys know. Be sure to look at the documentation for your devices, and also for any components that you're planning on buying before pulling the trigger on a purchasing decision. In my case, it cost me around, I think, a month's worth of delay, because I was working on other issues during the time that this was not working. So I didn't really lose much time until like recently, where I just needed to get this drive enclosure working. But now you guys know. Don't make the same mistake that I did. Be sure to do the research. And you should be able to avoid delays like what I encounter sometimes. Anyway, guys, I'm going to go on and end the live stream here. If you liked the video, leave a like, leave a comment, maybe subscribe or follow. This is going up on Twitch and YouTube. And hopefully you guys are having a good Sunday. I have work tomorrow. And as I mentioned, the SATA power cable, the splitter that I bought, won't be arriving until around next week. So I won't even be able to actually test to see if this will work until next week, but it probably will, thank goodness. With that, I'm going to go on and say peace out. You guys have a good Sunday. Maybe I'll do a gaming live stream later today if I get the time. If I'm not